So he's had many careers, including teaching nonviolent resistance under the umbrella of the Quakers, if you're familiar with them. They're our friends, right? Everyone's friends with Quakers. Working at Gay Film Festival in Seattle, stringing for the New York Times as a pre-med student at UNO, where he moved 1 week before Katrina. I know a few of those stories, right? So he found his calling as an artist in the wreckage of Katrina, and his work became known for having a pop sensibility that also brought After a few starring roles in group shows, he did a solo show at Jonathan Ferrari Gallery in New Orleans. And he's going to join us this evening and tell us about probably all sorts of other stuff on top of that as well. So, really excited. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm sorry we were late. That was my fault. I didn't bring my power cord. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know if you can dim the lights at all. Yeah, that's a little better. So we're going to talk about design. I want to tell you about a design project I did a couple of years ago. I usually am asked to talk about fine art, but I'm really psyched to talk about design because I'm not always sure that I care about art, but I always care about design. And the project that fell into my lap was to design the logo for a skate park. My friends started building it illegally. I think that skaters in New Orleans just got a little tired of not having a skate park, and they started building one under 610 at Paris Avenue, which explains the spelling. And right around the time that we were working on getting the park legalized, we were doing these fundraiser shows in bars. Bands would play. You'd pay $5 or $10 to get in, and that money would pay for concrete. So I designed this flyer for a benefit show at the Saturn Bar in the Bywater in St. Claude. And about a week after the show, a skater emailed me and said, can you send me the logo for the skate park? And I said, a logo for the skate park? The skate park doesn't have a logo. And he said, no, the thing that's on the flyer. And I realized, oh gosh, he thinks that's the logo. It's just a font. But this reminded me of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola put a lot of effort into their trademark, the way it looked, the way it sounded, the way it spelled. And they were really, really bothered by the fact that everyone started to call it Coke. Because they felt that when you called it Coke, you were diluting their trademark. And also, they didn't like the association with, it was also the slang term for an illegal street drug. Never mind that the drug was present in some of the product's early formulations. They still didn't like the associations. So for years, they ran these ad campaigns trying to convince people to not call it Coke. And they couldn't say, don't call it Coke, because then they'd be calling it Coke. So they ran these ads that said, demand the genuine by full name. Nicknames encourage substitution. If you ordered Coke, God only knows what you would get, probably an inferior product. And we all know how this ended up. Coke is it. It's the real thing, Coke. And this is now taught in business schools and in marketing classes and in design programs as one of the most epic design blunders of all time. They spent millions of dollars trying to convince people not to call it Coke. And I suppose that the lesson might be sometimes your customers know the name of your product, even if you don't. So if the skaters were telling me that this was the logo of the skate park, I had to consider the possibility that maybe they were right. So I asked some friends to join me at the studio one night for a project of just doodling for hours, and I asked some people who were designers and some sign painters and some graffiti artists and some other people, and the assignment was to sit around and write the word Parasite in lightning bolt lettering. And I started passing around the photo lettering typographical typesetting catalog from I think around 1971, which is always a nice place for me to start. And there it is, in the back of the book, page 372, in a section called Pictorial Typefaces, meaning the letters are made up of little pictures. There it is on the last line. Stan Flash. I love pictorial typefaces. Such bad taste, And here, the lightning bolts are kind of striking up, which is very unusual. But we looked at a lot of different examples of lightning bolt lettering. Like there are some flyers you could look at where, see the S in Dead Kennedys, it's got a kind of lightning bolt look to it, and some album covers where there's kind of lightning bolt typography. And here you start to get the sense of there's some kind of political overtones to this type of lettering. And it's not really clear what the politics are, but there's something communicated within the letter forms. And we looked at some collateral for rock bands, like here's a foam piece that's made for a band called Double Dagger with some nice lightning bolt lettering. We even looked at a crappy dollar store Frankenstein mask with this really delightful hand-lettered type on it. And even some graffiti, like if you ever go to Central or South America, the graffiti there looks really different from the graffiti in the United States. It's got these very stylized letter forms that are kind of long and skinny and have a kind of lightning bolt look to them. And there's a word for this style of graffiti, pichação. I think it's Brazilian Portuguese. I'm not pronouncing it right. I'm sorry if you speak Portuguese. You'll even see buildings covered with pichação from the ground floor all the way up to, say, the roof. There's a New Orleans graffiti artist who writes in this style. Mersa, he writes, and he was there that night, and he wrote out his pichação alphabet with some variations on each letter for us to kind of play around with. So one question would be, how did hundreds or thousands of graffiti artists in Central and South America all get the idea to write in this very kind of stylized way? And the answer to this question is well known. They were imitating the type on the covers of the great heavy metal albums of the 1970s and 80s. Which raises the question of where the heavy metal bands were drawing from. And I think that Slayer couldn't be making it more clear. The eagle. It's the Reichsadler. Oh dear. I'm afraid so. And we know how that turned out. This kind of lettering is everywhere in pop culture. Not just heavy metal, but prison tattoos. A hip-hop store. This is a page from a gang zine, a Latino gang in LA, showing you how to do the lettering correctly when you do the tattoos. So the style of lettering, as a lot of you probably know, you could generally refer to as black letter. Kind of looks like that. And that would be the English style. But there are a lot of different styles, and the kind that the heavy metal bands are drawing on would be the German style. So it led me to wonder whether all of this material, this pop culture material, Central American graffiti and heavy metal album covers, were they all coming from Fraktur? The German fascists were obsessed with typography. They were obsessed with design in general, but with typography specifically, and they even came out with style manuals. And this is an example of one, kind of like a corporate style manual, showing you how to use the typography correctly to communicate the right sort of ideology. And they commissioned new black letter typefaces that were modeled on older ones, but updated and designed to communicate a certain set of ideas, maybe about tradition, about history, Bavarian culture, maybe about toughness, militarism, things like that. Germans had been reading black letter for at least 500 years. The first book printed with movable type in Europe is this one, the Gutenberg Bible, and Gutenberg chose black letter to make his metal type. And this turns out to be a controversial decision from the start because people elsewhere in Europe said, why black letter? I mean, it made sense when people were writing with pen and ink like this. That's what handwriting looked like, scholarly handwriting. But now that we can make a movable type, why make it in black letter when it's so hard to read? And Italian and French typographers found it really annoying that Gutenberg had chosen blackletter. So blackletter was kind of controversial from the start, as it turns out. But by the time the 1930s roll around, Germans are completely used to reading blackletter. Entire newspapers are printed in blackletter, totally normal. And typewriters, Nazi Party encourages the creation of typewriters that produce blackletter, like this one. And even regular typewriters with Roman alphabet have a special symbol. You can see it above the 3, lightning bolts, the SS runes. So again, the obsession with typography, with design in general, but typography in particular, really shows through. And all of this changes suddenly. 1941, when the Nazi Party bans blackletter. And here's the edict. It's stamped January 1941, and it's signed by Martin Bormann, the propaganda chief. And there are a couple of really odd things about this. One is that the edict that bans blackletter is on a piece of paper that has blackletter at the top. Well, that's odd. And another thing that's weird about it is the reason that the edict gives for the need, the necessity of banning blackletter. It says that blackletter is a Jewish affectation that's been snuck into German culture by wily Jewish typographers. I'm not even making this up. The edict says that they were Jewish letters. Now, nobody believed this. There's nothing Jewish about blackletter. The real reason that the Germans had banned blackletter was probably that in the invaded countries, people found blackletter almost impossible to read. So that when German troops were showing up with blackletter everywhere, not only was it difficult to read, but it highlighted, let's say, the foreignness of the invader. Blackletter wasn't helping them win hearts and minds. Blackletter was banned as a kind of PR move, you could say. And at this point, the rest of European fascists said, well, good. We were sick of blackletter anyway. Now we can turn our attention to the real fascist typeface, Futura. And here is Mussolini's headquarters in Rome. You know, blackletter was backwards facing, was facing the past, was all about the past, a kind of mythological Bavarian past. But the Italian fascists said, here we have a set of typefaces that faces the future. The Bauhaus faces, Art Deco sans serif faces. These faces are stripped down and streamlined, futuristic, ready to do business. And this is really odd because the person who designed Futura, and here it is, the original cut of Futura, it's really different from the one that comes on our computers now. The one that comes preloaded on your laptop is a really cleaned up and standardized version of this. But here's the original version of it. It's a pretty idiosyncratic typeface. It's weird. And the guy who designed it, Paul Renner, was a well-known anti-fascist in Germany, was arrested for his anti-fascist activities, and was put into exile, and spends the rest of his life in Switzerland. Can't ever go back to Germany, can't face what's become of Germany. And the fact that Paul Renner's baby, Futura, is in any way associated with fascism is a great historical irony. The association of blackletter with heavy metal is so strong, or here, it's sometimes called neo-blackletter. It's not just heavy metal. It's, you can see it here in hip-hop, or even here, Defend New Orleans. The word New Orleans is said in blackletter. And all of them seem to share something in common, kind of marginality, maybe a sense of illegalism, embrace of criminality, willingness to resort to violence, maybe an endorsement of violence, or in some way a kind of flirtation with the fascist abolition of limits, you could say. And I think it's the rifle that makes the blackletter work there, and the skull too, the death. And the association of this kind of type with heavy metal is so strong and so enduring that it could be used to represent a fake heavy metal band. The documentary about a fake heavy metal band, Spinal Tap, with an umlaut over the N, which of course makes no sense, but could also be used by a real heavy metal band from Norway, calls itself Umlaut, as a joke, and all of the band's materials are designed to parody the association of heavy metal with German militarism and violence. And the SS symbol even finds its way, I'm reluctant to call them a heavy metal band, but finds its way into the logo for KISS, which, in another bizarre circumstance, when they toured Germany, became a problem, and they had to produce a separate set of materials in which the band's name was written without the SS runes. Etsy, filled with black litter, with these kinds of odd, almost unnameable overtones, a supermarket of signs and signifiers, floating free. In the end, inspiration struck much closer to home. I was walking through Lowe's and saw some tools with this logo on it and thought, oh, that's a very nice kind of lightning bolt sort of typography with maybe some black letter elements to it. And I opened it up in Illustrator and see what I could make of it. And one of the first things I noticed was that whoever had drawn it had put a kind of false perspective in it. The blue lines are converging towards the right. I thought that was pretty neat. And so I wondered what it would be like if I wrote the word parasite using this alphabet. And the problem being, it's not really an alphabet. It's just a lettering job. It doesn't have a full alphabet associated with it. So here were the letters that I could recycle out of the original. That's what I ended up drawing, just drawing it right on top of it in Illustrator. So you can see I changed it a good deal. I changed the proportions of the letters and really elongated them a lot. I kept the false perspective, though, and I kept the lightning bolt at the bottom. I added some skateboard wheels to it. But I do think that in the end, it's a parasitical version of the Milwaukee logo. So what would Paul Renner say? Well, I don't know. But I know what I would say to him. Relax, Paul. It's just a skate park. Thanks. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and questions and reactions to this. I know a lot of young designers or design students might say, I don't really like politics. And, the problem is politics likes you because you're designers. So it's very hard for us to get away from it, I think. And I'm curious, what you think about all of this. I mean, was it okay for me to draw on these sources to draw a skate park logo? Is that black letter? I'm not even sure. That certainly is. People thought black letter was pretty much over and done with after World War II, but Disneyland played a big role in resuscitating it, I think, oddly enough, in the films of Walt Disney. And it made a sort of quixotic comeback in the 50s, I think, to a large degree, thanks to Disney, oddly enough. But any thoughts, questions, critiques? Yeah.
A lot of black lettering when you design things? Is that like the main type that you look for?
I've almost never used it. I mean, I think because it feels like it's like shouting with a bullhorn, I mean, it's really hard to use, I think, effectively. But I see people doing it well. I think Defend New Orleans would be an example of someone using it not naively. I mean, I think that they know what they're doing, and I think it works. I'm not saying it puts them beyond criticism or anything like that. Nobody's beyond criticism. So I think I've almost never used it. But that would be true of a lot of typefaces that I love. I mean, I might love them from afar, you know. Yes. Yeah, almost never. I mean, I make my living as like a fine artist. I've got a gallery that represents me on Julia Street. But what I come from really is design. I mean, I started by making flyers and T-shirts for my friends' bands and things like that. And that was, in a way, my art school. And it's not a bad art school because you're working with black and white, usually, if you're doing flyers, and you're trying to grab somebody's attention from across the street. You know, that was always my goal. If someone was across the street and they saw the flyer in the cafe window, they would want to know what that is. Maybe they'd even cross the street to, to read it. So you're trying to hit somebody kind of hard from a distance, really catch them. So that turned out to be a pretty good design school for me. And then the downside is that when I ended up taking art classes at UNO from like Doyle, Gertie Jansen, and he would say, I'd be painting a painting and he'd say, stop making posters. Because he said that all I was doing was making posters again and again and again, making flyers. And I thought it was a really good criticism, so I tried to stop. But I always came back to it. So I have this kind of, in my work, I can't really get away from it. I try to get away from it. I'm not really making logos, but I keep making design. Yeah, I keep making design. I seemed unable to stop. Yeah.
Do you think, so you were saying about the Disneyland that you were like surprisingly enough, but Walt Disney was pretty anti-Semitic. Do you think that he was referencing Germanic sentiments?
I mean, so when you look at the sign, it is referencing, in a sense, the castle, right? Which is like a German or Austrian design. And so he's referencing a past, but an imaginary past, a kind of mix of real Bavarian culture and totally imaginary Florida, imaginary, Bavarian culture. So what is that? I mean, it's got ideology in it, but which? I'm not sure. What's the castle? Who lives there? Who's not allowed to live there? Who's thrown in the dungeon? I don't know. I mean, it's clearly pervaded with ideology, and I'm not presenting myself as the person who's got the answers, but I'm like you. I'm a fellow struggler trying to figure it out.
I'd never seen it look so creepy until you.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else? Yes.
To defend New Orleans, because I think that grew after Katrina, and that person was upset because there was in the news, people were like, New Orleans should just go away, and so it's this whole brand that this person created. I'm recalling that it happened after Katrina, so I do think it works for the concept of, we are who we are, and we should still be here, right? I don't know. I feel like that works too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was off the chain in New Orleans right after Katrina. So I think.
And it was like, let's all band together and say, we do exist here. We should exist here. So leave us alone.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's right. Anybody else?
Why topography students? You're in here, people who stay up behind.
So I thought it was really cool that how you looked at different typefaces and somehow made your own, kind of took me back to when we were in typography and we had to do a hybrid font, do this, move this. It was very interesting to see that process happen again. It was worth it.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, it was sort of like a dream job, right? Like a dream assignment, like do a logo for a skate park, So that fell into my lap, though, in a very odd way, and only when I was in my mid-40s. It's not the kind of assignment I would have gotten when I was 20, But I think it was, in the end, a sort of dream. Like, what? Make a logo for a skate park? Does skate park even need a logo? I wasn't sure, but people seem to be asking for one, which is a reflection of just our wider culture. The kids want things to have a logo, even something that's not a corporate entity and was built illegally by young people, sort of the opposite in a sense of a corporate project, but they still wanted it to have a sort of corporate identity, which is interesting, yeah. And there's something that I couldn't quite get away from. Yeah.
The reception been like of the skaters to the logo that you?
I think it's been pretty positive. I mean, some people painted it at the park on a metal ramp really big. Somebody showed me the first tattoo he'd ever gotten, and it was of the logo, which was really thrilling to see that somebody put it on themselves permanently. You know, how will it age? I mean, like any logo, that's an interesting question. Like this is already 4 or 5 years old, so at a certain point, will it just become a kind of nostalgia item? Maybe. Yeah, that'll be funny if and when that happens, yeah. I've been kind of like a type geek for a long time, so I think I've been absorbing that for a while. I found it, I've long been fascinated by, you know, if you're into lettering and typography, the fonts are kind of like friends. They have their own personalities, and you become interested in them and finding out more about where they came from. And always been like that. I think even when I was a kid, I knew that there were these things out there called typefaces. Not all kids know that. Some people, it's just all the same. It's just writing on signs, you know. But I was just a weird kid, and I love typefaces, and I couldn't wait to find out more about them. So I think I've always been interested in that, yeah. Anybody else? Thank you for your attention. You've been a lovely audience. I'm sorry that we started a couple minutes late because of my failure to bring a power cord. And I'll hang out for a few more minutes. And if you want to ask any questions in person or talk in person, I'll be delighted to. Thanks again.